introduce the first speakers. We've got a joint presentation for the first paper by Martyn and Elisa deCourcy. And Martyn is an honorary associate professor at the Australian National University School of Art and Design. His work is in the collections of the National Gallery of Australia, the National Gallery of Victoria, and the Canberra Museum Gallery. In 2014, he received an Australian Research Council Discovery Grant, along with Dr. Daniel Palmer, to research the curating of Australian art photography. And in 2015, he received an Australian Research Council Discovery Grant to lead the international project Heritage in the Limelight, the magic lantern in Australia and the world. Dr. Elisa deCourcy is an historian of early photography. She's currently the Research Fellow on the ARC project Heritage in the Limelight, the magic lantern in Australia and the world, at the ANU. She's been published internationally and was a 2018 Harry Ransom Center Fellow in Austin, Texas. In 2019, she was awarded an Academy of Humanities Publishing Grant for her co-authored book, Early Photography, Empire and Spectacle, the global career of showman daguerreotypist J.W. Newland, which will be published by Bloomsbury Academic in 2020. So I hope you join me in welcoming this current duo performance. Thank you.
Thanks, Anita. As Anita said, we've been working on a project about magic lanterns, and we're investigating the ways in which these objects have profoundly shaped Australia over the last 150 years, since about the 1840s. And they previously haven't really been looked at very much because they haven't fitted into classical museum taxonomies. So we're really trying to bring them up into visibility for curators, artists and historians to direct their gaze to. So far, team members have visited and reported on a whole range of collections, big and small, around Australia and around the world, where magic lanterns currently exist and are being rediscovered. And colleagues who have visited these collections have also begun to write personal responses to the slides, and we have a book coming out next year which collects some of these responses. And as well, we've assembled our own collection of over 5,000 slides and 10 or so lanterns, and this is an important part of our research as well, because from this collection we are doing reenactments. So Australia's projected image heritage extends from the 1840s up to the present, from the period of phantasmagorias to dissolving limelight views, to lantern entertainments, to slide lectures, and even up to PowerPoints, and to the projection events of today, like Vivid and so forth, that we all experience. So we wanted to see this in a kind of a continuity right up to the present day. And the objects that we're talking about are both lanterns themselves and slides. And the lanterns were quite diverse. They range from toy lanterns, which kids would have got for Christmas, cheaper lanterns used by churches and missions, driven by kerosene or by electric bulbs, and then more expensive lanterns made from mahogany that were used by travelling showmen. And the slides that we're looking at are also very, very diverse in their material qualities. They're either hand-painted glass images mounted in wooden frames or photographic slides. And the photographic slides are really about flexibility and mutability. They could duplicate and reverse photographic negatives. They could copy photographic prints. They could copy paintings, copy charts, copy diagrams, copy texts, and then they could be hand tinted. And in the early 20th century, some companies even began to use chromolithographic technology to produce chromolithographic slides in a mass production scale. And these were distributed in boxes with readings to schools throughout the empire. And then there's also heaps of hand-painted slides, which you'll be seeing tonight, mounted in frames. They're also imported into Australia and used in quantity. These could be single scenes, either painted from a template image, placed beneath and traced, and we've heard about tracing before as a technology of duplication, or they could be painted from black outlines, printed from an etched copper plate. And then there's mechanical slides, which used ingenious clockwork mechanisms to animate the slides. And these slides were popular for about 60 years, so very, very long time frame and a ubiquitous presence in Australian visual culture. And what we've discovered is that at its heart, the magic lantern was a practice of bricolage. Although much of the apparatus and the imagery, the hardware and the software, if you like, was manufactured and imported from overseas, they had to be put together and brought to life by an individual in a community in Australia. Slides were used for many different purposes. Educational and religious institutions used them in quantity. The temperance movement was just one of the many political movements that used what were called life model slides, where models posed against painted backdrops to tell a moral story. And the 20th century song slides were popular in theatres, where they illustrated popular songs sung by either a professional singer or the whole audience, thereby enhancing the sale of sheet music. And finally, amateur photographers, amateur photographers also produced slides in quantity. Making a slide wasn't all that much harder than making a print in an amateur darkroom. So we know that the magic lantern was a powerful experience for many Australians. The title of our forthcoming book sums it up, we think. We call it The Magic Lantern at Work, witnessing, persuading, experiencing and connecting. So the job was to actually change the audience in some way. The technological act of assembling, projecting a slideshow within different social or political groups became a unique, persistent way of transmitting historical energy and invoking historical agency. Through seeing the projected image, individuals are made to feel they were witnesses to distant events. Through the sequencing of the slides, the lecturer attempted to persuade them of his or her point of view. And through the collective experience of the lantern show, viewers felt connected to others. In one sense or another, every magic lantern show was a virtual passage to a physical and temporal reality wider than the individual's life usually allowed. So our kind of sort of overarching text that we live by is that any magic lantern slide, no matter how humble it is when you find it, if it's cracked or broken or just in shards, is still evidence that at some particular time, in some particular place, some Australians had collectively witnessed images, music and text, which were orchestrated by some individual or some organisation to give them an experience, persuade them of an opinion or connect them to others. So we think we have found some things that are peculiar to Australia, are specific to the Australian context, and we'd just like to highlight for you some of those things that we think are quite unique. And we have discovered in our work across different states that there's a large collection, for instance, of slides produced within Aboriginal Australia by the mission movement. And there's collections in virtually every state. And we think that in the future, these collections could be put together and would be a great resource for a future researcher into the stolen generations. Another important resource we think we found that's quite unique to Australia is a large quantity of theatre slides that exist in archives around the world. And these document, again, over a long period of time, 50, 60 years, changes in design, in businesses at a very local, micro level. Again, for a future researcher, an amazingly rich visual resource. Okay.
Most slide collections held in institutions are heterogeneous. They consist of full, partial or recombined sets, like Martyn was saying, often donated at different times with various levels of provenance. Perhaps obviously, looking for indicators both on and beyond the slide involves breaking down traditional institution collecting taxonomies to search for adjacent scripts, score or song material, newspaper references and reviews, bibliographical material about the lanternist or the lecturer, or business directories listing sale, often held elsewhere in the institution, and connections that aren't obviously made in catalogue records or inventories. There is one collection, though, that kind of defies this slipperiness, which we've worked with extensively and remains exhaustively catalogued and completely intact, such a treat, from the time of its original use. The Australian Museum here in Sydney hosted a program of weekly lantern lectures for over 3 decades from the 1910s. The slides used in these lectures were based on photographs and illustrations made during the empirical pursuit of fieldwork, mainly by staff scientists and the museum's photographers. And then they were translated into lantern slides by the technical staff at the museum, predominantly in the museum's photography department also. I've worked on excavating the significance of this collection with Vanessa Finney, the curator there, who many of you will know was the curator behind the recent Australian Museum Capturing Nature show that's recently closed. There are a number of reasons why this collection, we think, is of national and international significance. The up to 20,000 slides sit in the basement of the museum in purpose-built wooden cabinets. They were exhaustively catalogued at the time of their creation and then further annotated when they were projected in 3 leather-bound ledgers. This system includes note of the subject matter, both in its colloquial form and often with its Linnaean names, the lecture to which the slides belong, the date of the lecture, the lecturer, notes from the original photographer, and any finishing notes around the images that were made into slides. From the 1920s, many of the weekly lantern lectures were also abbreviated and reprinted with these illustrations in the museum's publication, the Australian Museum Magazine, also held in the archives alongside the slides. And these slides and their ephemera represent not only an early to mid-century image library, but also a compendium of the museum's public-facing knowledge. A small portion of these slides are beautifully hand-coloured, and when you cross-check the slides with their ledger reference, Vanessa and I found that it was women's names next to lots of the hand-coloured entries. Women artists were employed at the Australian Museum in the interwar period in a variety of roles. Their work represents a significant nexus between art and science, and their vital role in moderating scientific communication. In other museums around the world, the Peabody Museum and the British Museum, women held largely volunteer roles at similar times, or were employed as clerical assistants. And even if they kind of managed to escape these roles, any documentation of their engagement with the collection is very hard to find. But at the Australian Museum, women like Lillian Medlin and Ethel King, who were trained at Gillian Ashton at the Rocks, the art school, were both credited in the margins of lantern lectures and in the press for their skill of scientifically accurate colouring. Even though the hand colouring was performed to only a small selection of the 20,000 slides, for obvious reasons, only a few in each lecture, it's crucial for generating an overall sense of awe and wonder for what would otherwise have been objects and scenes photographically captured in monochrome. For lectures on museum fieldwork, the slides provide a visual genealogy to sites of discovery and specimen provenance, and illuminate the processes of preparation for items sometimes displayed elsewhere in the institution. Certainly, specimen contextualization had already begun in exhibition spaces, with an uncluttering of display cases, to the painting of exhibition backdrops and the placement of taxidermy in dioramas to create more immersive experiences for audiences. This work also occupied female staff, as seen in the slide, showing Lillian Medlin painting an exhibition backdrop. Equally, the lantern slide lectures captured and represented actual hands, or indeed the whole form of the fieldwork scientist or taxidermist. The first slide you're looking at on this slide, it's a bit meta, was originally included in a lantern lecture on seashore and marine life. Its ledger reference labels the staff scientist as Anthony Musgrove as the subject, and the location of the shot as Port Jackson in Sydney Harbour. 2 years later, the museum magazine ran a feature article on bottle and glass rocks at Port Jackson, in which it republished some of the images from the original lecture. The ledger page for the 1924 lecture is further annotated with red script, showing that in 1927, a selection of the slides from the 14-strong series was singled out for hand colouring, presumably for a rerun of the content. King, the woman with in the shot of the fish on the earlier slides, coloured both this and the second and third image you see. The second image depicts an octopus being winched from bottle and glass rocks by the hand of a marine biologist, and the third is the cast of an Atlantic octopus from many thousands of miles away, where the index notes model in museum. The use of colour here is probably intended to inspire the lantern audience to tie local natural history methods conducted in familiar geographies with collecting specimens from further afield. The audience's attention is drawn to the scientific work of studying octopi literally on their doorstep, as well as equivalent objects from far away on display in the museum as models or casts. The slides are part of what Elizabeth Edwards has identified in a British context as photographic systems of interrelated resources, constituting both ways of knowing and working. Projected in the Hallstrom Theatre at the heart of the museum for weekly lantern lectures, the lantern slides bolstered the authority of individuals involved in the collection of specimens far beyond its walls. They represent these scientists among networks of travel, processes of collection, and utilising scientific material in the field. They also depict post-field work practices of preservation and mounting, which occurred back in the museum, tantalisingly close but otherwise off limits to museum patrons. So, as this case study indicates, it's crucial to see magic lantern slides not as images but as objects. For example, the National Film and Sound Archives holds a magic lantern slide of the Melbourne professional slide maker from the print of the famous Holman Hunt Light of the World picture. But their online catalogue only reproduces a virtual image and not its material objecthood as an annotated, labelled sheet of glass. Our project holds a similar magic lantern slide by a similar professional slide maker, but our online catalogue reproduces, small plug, our online catalogue reproduces the slide as a thing and its material provenance is visualised. Ironically, in an age of hyper-reproducibility where images float more and more ever, it is crucial to anchor them in a particular material specificity. For instance, just by keeping to the case study of Light of the World, our research project owns 2 more of these slides of this popular optical experience, each one a different quality and has different uses. Evidently, these are cased for Sunday school or an art history lecture used in different contexts. We believe that the term use is key to understanding the significance of magic lantern culture in Australia. Although they are objects, not images, they can't properly be understood as merely inert specimens to be looked at in a glass vitrine or case. As objects, they are crucially part of an assemblage which included a magic lantern, an auditorium, a performer, and an audience. The experiences of the magic lantern share kinship, of course, with experiences of audiences had with cinema and theatre, and on a theme park ride or at a church service or in a schoolroom, a sense of communion. But it is also specific to the magic lantern, the exact combination of the experience, connecting, persuading, witnessing, could be afforded by no other apparatus. The lantern show was very good at bringing people together. Still and animated, photographic and hand-painted slides, music and song, formal recitation and informal extemporization, human manipulation and technical operation, all intimately shared in domestic and public spaces, and the exact nature of which combination was unique for each occasion.
So because we think that the magic lantern is so specific, our approach to reenactment at the same time has to be specific as well. We think it can't be the same as digitally restoring a film or performing a Baroque concerto on period instruments. For that reason, we've developed two complementary approaches to allow contemporary audiences to connect with the lantern as a bricolage apparatus. And those are creative reenactment and creative reuse. So we do reenactments, which you'll see tonight, and hopefully you'll think it's creative. And we found this creative reenactment to be very useful in linking the experience of the magic lantern to specific sites. So for instance, recently, a couple of years ago, we performed a show at Bundanon called Double Drowning Fatality, which combined the lantern with aspects of verbatim theatre to commemorate an actual drowning which happened near the site in 2022. So even though the slides were different, there was still that sense of connection to the site through the text. So it's combining and recombining image and text. And tonight we'll be performing a show that's also about this space and another space, and we'll be gauging with the collection at the Rouse Hill House and Farm, which we'll be hearing more about later. And we'll be performing a set that was once performed at Rouse Hill in the 1860s. So even more than most objects, since these slides are media machines made to show media content, that sense of frisson, that slightly disreputable combination of the educational and the entertaining is very difficult to capture for a contemporary audience. It needs to be performed. While a straight reenactment, where everything is done as closely as possible to how we think it might have been done in the 19th century, the way maybe a medieval jousting reenactor might hand forge his chain mail for a suit of armour, could replicate the basic form of a magic lantern show. Could it generate a similar frisson in a contemporary audience, one inured to a century and a half worth of subsequent media frills? This is the question that we've been grappling with. So this is an experiential object, and that's what we are seeking to recover. Although the contemporary elements we reintroduce, such as music and acting, are new and therefore alien to the authentic historical, they actually do conform to the way that the apparatus was used historically as a form of bricolage, combination, improvisation. Similarly, we have used creative reuse, begun to work with contemporary artists, worked with a computer artist, Kieran Brown, who has reprogrammed for us digitally using computer algorithms, a chromatrope, which we'll be hearing more about later, and also working with contemporary painters, and who have been repainting for us dissolving views. And one of the slides you'll be seeing tonight is a contemporary painting that we've inserted into the historical period. I might just go on to the end there. Just running out of time.
So aside from the difficulties in researching magic lantern slides, their archival slipperiness and the improvisation with which they were often used, this surrogate status has largely been, their surrogate status as copies of originals from other forms has largely been behind why they have evaded serious scholarly attention. But increasingly, slide libraries and derivative objects are gaining attention both in the academy and beyond. The Getty, for example, is in the process of digitally archiving its 700,000 strong picture library, complete with views of verso annotation and archival storage, because this material and its arrangement has value beyond the original. It tells us different things. The ephemera shows practices of collecting, valuation genealogies scribbled on the back of copies, paper printing techniques, even omissions in research and collecting. Increasingly, institutions and scholars have been applying the same logic to the surrogate lantern slide. What did the projected slide offer that its original static drawing, photo or print could not? We've started to investigate this a little bit in the digital space. And to capture this value, we need to move from examining these objects singularly from the perspective of their stable materiality and look at interrogating the effect of their projected use. The creative reuse experiments discussed in this paper begin to do that. Digital archives, the leading way individuals experience museum and library collections today, will need to consider not only breaking down genre boundaries of classification to allow for magic lantern scripts to sit alongside images, often held in different parts of the institution, but also consider multimedia avenues to capture the slide's representation as a projection as well as an artefact.
So just one more paragraph. So historians, curators and artists are discovering that when seen as objects usable within present experience, not just as inert bearers of images copied from history, then the magic lantern slides they are stumbling upon in Australian museums and archives, still sequenced in many cases in their boxes, still with layers of scribbling inscription, making palimpsests on their edges, become extremely useful resources for connecting with particular affective experiences in the past. Thank you.